We are back with friend of the show, Mehdi Hasan of Zeteo. Thanks so much for coming on and wrapping up this week
Ugh,
in news. Did something
what a week to
happen?
do.
Yeah. I mean, I get, overall big picture thoughts, Mehdi. I haven't even begun to process what organizing for Palestine, for example, is going to look like under a Trump administration. But looks like they're floating Mike Pompeo again. They're bringing the gang back. Sanctions on Iran is going to be a top priority, says Steve Mnuchin. Great.
Netanyahu's just appointed a new ambassador to the US, who's a Kahanist who lives on a settlement, who's a total far-right annexationist, sending a very clear signal, Netanyahu, as to what he wants Israeli government policy to be in Washington, D.C. Trump is going to return the favor and probably reappoint David Friedman, who was his ambassador to Israel first time round, who also has property in illegal settlements and is an annexationist, just published a book saying the West Bank should be part of Israel. So this was always the worry when people said to me online, I'm sure they said this to you too, Emma, but Mehdi, how can it get any worse? Well, A, things can always get worse, and B, the West Bank, right? Once they're done with Gaza, it was always going to be the West Bank was always their ultimate prize. So yes, things are going to get worse in the Middle East. Marco Rubio, Mike Pompeo, these are the kind of America First isolationists, yeah, right, who are being lined up to do foreign policy under Trump. He appointed Brian Hook to run his State Department transition team. Brian Hook is a long-standing neocon, served in the first administration, did the maximum pressure campaign against Iran, has long wanted a war with Iran. So sorry, I hate to say I told you so. And normally I jokingly say I hate to tell you, told you so because I love saying I told you so. But actually I do hate to say I told you so because it's horrible. All of the things I was hoping would be wrong are actually happening, as some of us warned. And on the Middle East, that's happening. On the domestic front, they're ramping up the plan for mass deportations. They're talking about denaturalizing American citizens. So good luck to all the Latino folks who said, well, I'm voting for Trump because he's only against illegals, not me. Well, actually, he can make you illegal. That's the powers they're taking for themselves.
Well, you had just mentioned in our break this piece that in the Statesman where the reporter here interviewed, I guess it was Rebecca Bellhouse, interviewed undocumented immigrants, but also just people working down in Texas, I believe. And these were some of the quotes here, if we could just pull this up. Several men, including Victor and Danilo, said scarcity of work and the growing competition can make the day laborers resentful of each other. Since Trump was first elected, the number of immigrant men who wait for work in the Home Depot parking lot has grown and diversified. What was mostly Mexican and Central American immigrants now includes Venezuelans, Haitians, and Cubans. It makes both men open to Trump's calls to reduce the number of crossings at the border. So this is a key point. They basically show that there's resentment in between like different groups here, but like that's part of the vacuum that the I don't know if we have the money quote. What was the big quote that you had mentioned? I'm on no sleep.
From that piece?
Yeah.
Oh, the quote is from an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala. Trump wants to deport those who do bad things. I haven't broken any laws. And I think what's so interesting about this story is it's kind of a microcosm of everything that happened at a national level with American citizens. But clearly the trends still apply even to undocumented immigrants who can't vote. So this belief that the economy will be better under Trump and that it's bad now, false. This idea that Trump is only going to deport criminals, false. The Trump people say it themselves, we're going to go after grandmothers, we're going to go after dreamers. Like they're very open about that. So you're just making up defenses for Trump that Trump is even offering. Oh, he's only going after the bad people. This idea that there is scarcity and the competition between groups. Look, there's always been divide and rule by white folks when it comes to brown and black folks. I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm from the United Kingdom because Britain went to India centuries ago and took over India by turning Muslims against Hindus against Sikhs. So divide and rule is not new. And I think playing off different ethnic groups against each other is something that's going to happen more and more in the coming months. I think liberals are going to fall into that trap because, we saw this swing from Latino voters to Trump. I saw reports, I hope they're false anecdotal reports, but I'm seeing people on social media claiming that some people are now going to call up the ICE on their neighbors, some white liberals, because they're so angry. Again, that's anecdotal. I hope it's not true, but Jesus. I do see there's going to be a lot of tensions between different communities. I see some black activists and folks on TikTok are saying we'll never support Palestine again because we we blame those Muslims in Michigan for abandoning Harris. So there's a lot of internecine warfare there in the Democratic coalition, if it still exists as a coalition, which is all very worrying. But to come back to the undocumented immigrant point, why it's so interesting, that piece from the Austin American Statesman, is number one, it's the drawbridge mentality at its best, not just legal immigrants pulling up the bridge, pulling up the ladder on illegal immigrants or quote unquote undocumented immigrants, but even undocumented among themselves say, well, I'm here, but I don't want anyone else here. And it goes to the grain of this, oh, well, if you're a person of color and you vote for Trump, that proves Trump's not a racist. No, it doesn't. It just proves that all sorts of people can internalize bigotry, division, hate.
Yes, of course. Of course. I mean, we see how whiteness has evolved in American politics in just the past 150 years. And we're seeing similar
Italian,
shifts
Irish,
in this regard. And frankly, Trump was able to pit different immigrants against one another. And I would say that his focus on, oh, no, they're illegal, it makes it almost so like, oh, if you're here legally, and also if you're here legally, you can vote for me, by the way, you're more American. And it's almost like this reaffirmation of people's Americanism or their patriotism when that hasn't been the case just by dividing and conquering and pitting groups against one another. But the problem is that the Democrats ceded the entire issue of immigration to the right and had no positive message.
No positive message. It was Harris's only message on immigration was, well, I supported the bipartisan right-wing bill and you killed it. Right. It was a purely tactical argument. It wasn't about a vision for America, about how you bring people together. And I'm not saying immigration is an easy issue to win. Like the quote-unquote border crisis has permeated well beyond the headlines. It is a real issue. People do bring it up spontaneously, even in migrant communities. I get that. But the fact, and Harris was never going to transform the immigration debate in 100 days, let's be realistic. I get all those issues, but the reality is that when you've kind of ceded the ground, it's a huge problem. I also think the media, again, sorry, media failures. I know no one votes on policy, but the reality is Trump was allowed to sell his messages. It's about illegals when his actual message is not about illegals. Stephen Miller on day one is saying, we're going to expand our denaturalization commission. And one point I always make to people who fall into this right-wing trap of, playing one side against another, legal against legal, black against brown, Mexican against Muslim, is, you know what? The white supremacist doesn't care whether you're legal or illegal, doesn't care whether you're black or brown, doesn't care whether you're a Muslim, Arab, or a black Christian. They hate you. And, the example I give is El Paso. I know we've all memory hold all the hate crimes and violence and domestic terrorism from Trump term one. But if you go back to El Paso and the Walmart shooting, and I think, one of the biggest massacres of Latinos in modern American history, pretty sure that shooter who went in there saying invasion, borrowing Trump and the GOP's rhetoric, didn't go in there and check with people whether they were legal or illegal before he shot them.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the same thing with the cats and dogs rhetoric about Springfield. Those migrants were here legally under temporary protected status. But no, I think they're illegal. And at the end of the day,
he just declared them illegal through fiat.
All the mockery of that didn't matter. I mean, this is my most lib point of the day, but I do need to just put it out there in case there are women that are watching this. I've been having a lot of conversations with women of some friends of mine too, of different, backgrounds and different races, whatever. And the same through line is emerging, and they all voted for Harris, right? So it's not the full picture, but where do you go from here in the sense where she, despite all of her campaign failures, was clearly more competent, smarter, more empathetic, articulated herself, destroyed him in the debate. And he did nothing. He came out there, he swayed around to music, he made ridiculous statements. It's so reflective of how many women exist in our society, and the fact that he ran this explicitly misogynistic campaign that got rewarded, that was really the thing that stuck with me. And it's just like, I do think that we need to acknowledge that there is that element here, the misogynoir and the racism, and also 100%. The fact that she, whether it's true or conventional wisdom or not, on a national campaign, felt that she was very hamstrung from communicating issues in a way that might have made a difference because of this perception of her being too liberal. And we just have a really long way to go.
Emma, it's not even too liberal. As you say, it's just about being a black woman Democrat means you can't say certain things that a white Republican can. I mean, we all know that if she had spent 20 minutes talking about the vagina of a prominent American sportswoman, it would have been the end of her campaign. She would have
Yes.
drawn down the rates that night. Trump got away with it. He didn't just get away with it. People celebrated and thought it was funny. So that kind of double standard is just so brazen and so infuriating. You want to tear your hair out and just give up on life. I do think, look, we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I've been slightly frustrated over the last few days where my kind of social media timeline, the people I'm surrounding myself with, are very divided on the liberal left. You've got the kind of, she ran a flawless campaign and it was all the fault of the American people, kind of one side. And then the other side is the Bernie, well, we abandoned the working class and we deserve what we got. I don't think either narrative is fully true. I think we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to accept the fact that there was an incumbency issue, right? You've seen the data, the FT put together the numbers going back 120 years. Never has there been a year in history over the last 120 years in which every government in the democratic world lost either power or lost seats and votes. And that happened this year, every government. Yep. And actually Harris did better than a lot of other incumbents. So that's one thing to bear in mind, that she was going against very real headwinds, post-pandemic, anti-incumbency, post-inflation, frustration that is global, not just American. So that's one point. But on the and the other point is Harris didn't run the best campaigns. It clearly was a flawed campaign. It wasn't flawless at all. She went on TV and said, I wouldn't do anything different to Biden. Insane. What a dumb thing to say. I think everyone can now agree on that. Even supporters of hers told me at the time she should have distinguished herself. She made a lot of mistakes campaigning with Cheney, all of that stuff that we can talk about. But again, I'm torn. So I say on the one hand this, on the one hand that, and then I jump around. And I go, okay, but her campaign was not great. But then I come back to what you just said, which is, okay, her campaign wasn't great, but she wasn't talking about pets being eaten on a live debate stage. She wasn't swaying to music for 45 minutes, talking about Arnold Palmer's genitalia and saying migrants should be put in a UFC fighting league. Trump was, and he won. So
Trump was, and just to add, earlier this week, he was saying that I would want to see Mike Tyson in a ring with Kamala.
Yes.
Like, how do, and we have someone write in, all black women are tired of being reminded that you can do everything right and it's still not good enough. That's like, I think the depression, and there's all these material structural issues with the Democratic Party, but that is the thing that I keep returning to, is he was saying, I want her to get beaten up and then rewarded the next day.
And Liz Cheney being put in front of barrels, like he doesn't like women, we know that, and he wants to inflict violence on women. His own first wife accused him of inflicting violence and rape on her. So let me just get back to the point about the black women thing. Any black woman running for president in America for any major job faces implicit bias, right? The case about Harris was it was explicit. It wasn't like a Republican doing nudge wink. It was Trump saying she's lazy as hell. She's a stupid woman. She's low IQ, right? It was just brazen, and he gets away with it. She loses. And what's really frustrating is some on the left. This is why I'm going to criticize both sides. I'm going to do both sides, which I hate doing, but I'm going to do both. The liberals are going around saying, we're blaming the American people. We did nothing wrong. Some are. And some on the left are going around saying, well, you can't blame the American people. You have to blame the campaign. And I'm saying, what are you talking about? We can criticize the campaign, but also criticize the American people. I'm sorry, let's not infantilize the voters. As bad as as solid as the incumbency argument is, as bad as the inflation in 2022 was, as limited as the Democrats' economic populist appeal was, I can take on board all of that. That doesn't forgive anyone voting for Trump. I'm not going to forgive anyone voting for Trump. Sorry. That requires agency. You chose. You could have sat at home. You could have voted Stein. You could have expressed your displeasure in multiple ways. You chose to embrace the convicted criminal found liable for sexual abuse, twice impeached, insurrection guy who finished his campaign with open racism and misogyny, who has no plan for the economy. Please don't come and talk to me about inflation when he's about to jack up prices with tariffs. This is the most insane argument I've ever heard. People voted because of inflation. I get it. They were upset about inflation. But they actively chose to put in a person who is going to drive up prices. So I do think we need to have a conversation about the American public, the misinformation diet. Just reading a piece on Salon about like how many people were living in bubbles. You've seen the Ipsos Mori polling from a few weeks ago that's all over social media, which shows that voters who thought crime was up and border crossings were up and inflation was up, they were more likely to vote for Republicans. And those who believed it was down, which is the factual truth, that crime is down, border crossings are down, inflation is down, we're more likely to vote Democrat. We have to have that conversation. I know Democrats don't want to look like they're being elitist or lecturing the voters, but there is a big swath of American voters who no longer follow facts and figures, no longer read newspapers, don't care about facts and figures, get their news from Facebook or their Republican uncle. That's a problem. We need to be honest about that.
And we've been raising the alarm about the kind of manosphere influencer space on this program for quite a while, and it was reflected in the numbers with 18 to 29-year-old men. TV president in a TV country makes everybody laugh. He's so funny and memeable and silly, and he does a dumb dance.
100%.
And like, I mean, I don't understand. Like, that is really at a certain level. How else can you explain it?
No,
how else can you explain
the
it?
silver lining, though, Emma, is Trump is sui generis. So can Republicans replicate this over the long term? Not necessarily. Certainly not J.D. Vance, who's got the charisma of a chair.
Totally right.
So and certainly not his kids, who are all dumb as shit. So I think the real issue is, we're going to have to try and survive this guy for 4 years. But in terms of a long-term GOP strategy, I don't think anyone else can get away with what Trump gets away with. I don't think Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton or anyone else can get away with what I think Don Calloway, the Democratic Party strategist, was on my show on Zeteo earlier this week. And he made a good point. He said, look, Trump won this election 15, 20 years ago when he did The Apprentice. That's when he won this election, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's 100% true, right? His persona is still, even today, for low information voters, it's, all right, well, it's Trump, the guy I know from TV and memes. It's the business guy. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and he is overperforming MAGA Republicans down the back. Like, so, yes. They're going to do it again, the Republicans. This is a mandate for our politics. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a structural issue with the Democratic Party that has broken apart its coalition by trying to appeal to suburbanites. There's also massive issues of misogyny and racism and purchasing power for people. Then it's not going as far as it used to. There's economic pain. We haven't had a real robust social program fully socialized since Medicare that has helped people in any real material way in this country. And that's the toxic stew and the incumbency thing.
And let me just be difficult and throw in some kind of caveats. I don't know if you saw the excellent reporting about the child tax credit, which helped bring down poverty by half, right? It expires at the end of 2021. Joe Manchin refuses to extend it. Every Republican, including Romney, refuses to extend it. What's interesting is the White House had assumed there would be a public backlash and that people would be kind of standing outside their members of Congress offices like they did for the ACA. And they didn't. And the polling showed that a lot of voters, while they benefited from the child tax credit, thought it was too liberal and it needed more work requirements. And I think we have to deal with the fact that Americans, it's not that easy, as Bernie puts it, that you just offer a bunch of lefty policies which are good for the economy and morally right to do, but they don't necessarily translate into electoral, especially when you racially code them. For a lot of poor white people, they see quote unquote welfare queens, right? They see the Democrats offering goodies, which they benefit from, but they also don't want their black or Hispanic neighbor to benefit from it, or they think they're over benefiting. These are the conversations we have to have, because that's the reality. You can put out all the social programs you want, but in a country still plagued by racism and racial divides, that's always going to influence them. And by the way, come back to the ignorance point, you mentioned abortion. I saw so many young women, not one, multiple, on social media saying stuff like, well, abortion, Dobbs didn't happen under Trump, it happened under Biden.
I know.
When do we start doing civic education? When do we explain to people how the American political system even works? The average American does not understand the separation of powers, does not understand the Supreme Court, right? Our schools have failed us miserably.
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone have a point where we've defunded education to the point where our schools are colorful prisons, and then we wonder about like civic education for people. But the Medicare drug prices that Biden did a good job of negotiating, do you know when they're going to take effect?
Yeah, Trump's going to take 26. Trump's going to get advantage. That was a ridiculous move to wait. What was it? 8 years, 6 years, whatever, for it to kick in. All these things that.
He thought he'd win re-election because he's the most arrogant politician I've ever seen. Yeah.
The Republicans get it right, Emma. They get it. Remember Trump putting his name on the checks? They delayed. They literally hurt people in America by delaying sending the checks out. We know that now from one of the recent many books that came out. Was it Woodward? One of the books pointed out that reporting showed that the Treasury folks had to sit and have a whole internal discussion. Actually, I think it was FOIA emails that came out where they actually were struggling. They were like, we need to get these checks out, but we don't know how to put Trump's name on it. And they had to delay the entire process to put his name on it. The guy understood the importance of putting his name on it ahead of an election, right? Democrats have never understood that idea of kind of coming up with good policy, but also communicating the good policy, owning the good policy, chest beating about it. My good friend Chris Hayes, former colleague, often makes the point that Republicans will take the smallest of win and make it into the biggest of wins, right? Whereas Democrats had this great economy in many ways, not 100% great, but in terms of the metrics that people measure, unemployment, growth, etc., And they didn't chest beat in the same way. The modesty, fake modesty and all that crap. You watch, and I've tweeted this, and I'm sure you've said something similar. January 20th, January 21st, whenever it is, Trump will be bragging about how strong the economy is.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, at the end of the day, the traditional metrics, I think, are capitalistic, and they're more about the marketplace and elite people who already have a lot of shares or whatever, who are judging this kind of thing.
Unemployment's one we all care about, right? Labor force participation is at its highest in living memory. Unemployment's at 4%. That's a good thing, and we should celebrate that.
Absolutely.
And he did that. And remember, normally when you break inflation, you do it through higher unemployment, right? That was what Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, who's now refusing to resign under Trump, hilariously, Biden should have got rid of him. He was a Trump appointee. But he had made that point. He goes, well, you know, if we have to have higher joblessness, oh, well, that's what we have to do to bring down prices. What the Biden administration miraculously did was to bring down prices without giving us a recession. And by the way, when people say, oh, stop blaming the American voters, vibe session, etc., 6 in 10 Americans in the summer of this year said they believed we were in a recession. I don't know how journalism and democracy copes with that.
I don't know either, but I do know that the Democrats can't pursue this path, even though Biden did improve domestically on Obama's neoliberal austerity agenda. The antitrust stuff was phenomenal. Yeah, we'll see how like the child tax credit. JD Vance talks a big game about Lena Khan. Guarantee you, she's not going to be sticking around, of course. But like, I mean, the Democrats have, I think. It's difficult for them to pair that message where there were some good things on the economy, and I know you have to run, so this will be my final question for you. They do good things on the economy, but then they target suburban voters and Republicans, and they don't. Those are the people that already are on board with the message about the economy being good, because the economy is good for them, right? If you're making over $100,000, that makes sense.
They don't think it is either, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, I guess. I don't know. I mean, the fact that Trump ran... Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the fact that some of the policies are still doing well in ballot initiatives in Missouri and Montana and all these places, Wisconsin, like, that's good, right? It's crazy that people in Missouri turned up and said, we're going to protect abortion rights and we're going to raise the minimum wage. We're also going to vote for Josh Hawley and Donald Trump. That to me is crazy. It reminds me of the Winston Churchill apocryphal quote where he said the best argument against democracy is 5 minutes in conversation with a voter. But it is crazy to me, but it also reminds me that policy-wise, we know this, the Washington Post did this before the election. When you roll out Democratic Party policies without saying they're Democratic Party policies, everyone supports them. Trump voters prefer them to Trump policies, right? So let's not get into the whole policy game. The policies are one. The issue is, who's the right messenger? The issue is, how populist are you willing to be? The issue is, how do you deal with a media environment in which the right have basically, turned us into a reality-free universe? These are some of the issues that Democrats have to really think about going forward. And look, is it depressing that another woman was defeated in the United States to every other country in the, not just Western world, but democratic world? India, Pakistan, Bangladesh have all had women leaders, but the United States, for some reason, can't bring itself to elect a woman leader. Not just can't bring itself to elect a woman leader, but both women lost to a brazen misogynist. That is a fundamental problem for American society. And one last point I'd make is, we're not talking enough about American society. Right? I'm less worried about the laws Trump passes, and I'm much more worried about the kind of country and society he turns us into and what he does to our social fabric. He's a man who has one singular skill. He brings out the worst in people. And sadly, I think that's what we're going to see in the coming months.
I think you're right. Mehdi Hasan, Zeteo, please support their work over there. Phenomenal work on the issues of the day, but also Palestine and foreign policy. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.